has spoken, we passed a law, bipartisan. We said crack cocaine is such a bad deal that if you find someone with this much of it, a quarter's worth, not in value, in size, 5 years in jail.
Biden had co-sponsored the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, which meted out the same mandatory minimum prison term to someone possessing 5 grams of crack cocaine as to someone possessing 500 grams of powder cocaine.
5 years, no probation, no parole. If you have this much, lock them up and put them in our prison.
He continued pushing to create the office of the drug czar after President Ronald Reagan had vetoed his first legislative attempt, and advocated locking up young drug offenders in, quote, military-style boot camp prisons.
Boot camps for youthful offenders. Under this bill, we can string up barbed wire. We can build Quonset huts and we can put them in boot camps. We can do that.
In 2002, Biden introduced the Rave Act, or the Reducing Americans' Vulnerability to Ecstasy Act. He argued that ecstasy abuse among teenagers was skyrocketing, and that it was time to pass legislation he had long planned.
I've been fighting to get these club drugs changed and scheduled for years. DEA was my opposition.
The Rave Act not only increased penalties for drug crimes, it went after anyone who owned the property where people did drugs.
That's the scum who should be put in jail, not just the guy selling the pills. Arrest the promoter. Find a rationale unrelated to drugs. You don't have to get them for drugs. Turn off the water, I put you in jail. I put you in jail.
The law expanded authorities' power to classify venues as crack houses, a provision that federal prosecutors are now using to stop cities from opening overdose prevention sites.
I'm the guy who authored the crack house legislation. We can use the crack house legislation to tear down these buildings. You can literally bulldoze down their business. Great big bulldozer, just bulldoze it down, literally, not figuratively.
Biden also lamented not being able to force press outlets to stick to the government's messaging about drugs.
Holding our media accountable is something we all desire, but there's a thing called the First Amendment, which is read in a way that I think is a little excessive.
In 2008, Biden began to recant on some of his past stances on drugs and crime. As vice president, he pushed for the 2010 Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced but did not eliminate the crack cocaine sentencing disparity he had helped usher into law.
After 21 years of study and reviews, these facts have convinced me that the 101 disparity cannot be supported.
But as Biden prepares to confront new perceived drug crises, reformers are still struggling to unwind many of the consensus policies he has worked to enact in the war on drugs.
It was a big mistake when it was made, but it's trapped an entire generation.
We disagree with the president's decision to cut the Customs Service, the Coast Guard, and the Border Patrol. We think we should do more to stem the flow of drugs across our borders.
In 1996, Biden boasted about the additional resources his crime bill had funneled to border security agencies and argued for sending the military to the Mexican border to deal with drug trafficking.
There ain't enough customs agents to collect enough pills.
People are driving across that border with tons, hear me, tons. It's all coming up through corrupt Mexico.
Today, Biden mocks Trump for using the military at the border. He said that calls to build the wall are divorced from reality and won't stop the flow of illegal narcotics or human smugglers.
All the bad things are coming through ports of entry right now. We don't need a wall.
But leading up to his 2008 presidential campaign, he said this.
I voted for the fence related to drugs. A fence will stop 20 kilos of cocaine coming through that fence. It will not stop someone climbing over it or around it.
Biden was referring to the 2006 Secure Fence Act signed by George W. Bush, which didn't tamp down the drug trade or border crossings, but did force migrants further into increasingly dangerous routes and remote desert areas, which according to the ACLU contributed to thousands of deaths.
President Obama, I think, did a heck of a job. To compare him to what this guy's doing is absolutely, I find, close to immoral.
Biden now condemns the Trump administration's tactics of enforcement and deportation.
The most vulnerable, the undocumented. How are we made better or stronger as a nation when immigrant and Latino communities live in a daily terror of an ICE raid on their workplace? This is heartbreaking. Not only heartbreaking, it's the very definition of being counterproductive.
But in 1996, he voted for a law that increased detentions and expedited removals for immigration-related offenses, largely creating the current approach.
Punish American employers who knowingly violate the law when in fact they hire illegals.
During Biden's years as vice president, the federal government took full advantage of the infrastructure and expanded powers the law had established, and the Obama administration deported a record number of people.
You called me deported in chief. I did not. We lay the groundwork for passing comprehensive immigration reform.
It took much too long to get it right. And the president did get it right by DACA, as well as making sure that he tried to protect parents as well. And by the way, moving on an immigration bill as well.
But that bill failed, so the best Biden can do today is promise that he won't use the deportation machinery he helped create, and that presidents from both major parties have employed during so-called border and immigration crises, at least temporarily.
In the first 100 days of my administration, no one will be deported at all.
Law enforcement today faces terrorist bombings like we've never seen in our history as a nation.
In 1995, Biden had introduced a bill that combined all of his ideas for growing the surveillance state.
Civil libertarians were opposed to it. You guys tried to help get it passed, including the wiretap changes and the rest.
Though it floundered for years, after 9/11, Congress rushed through an amended version of that legislation with overwhelming bipartisan support.
You can ask the Attorney General this, because I got a call when he introduced the Patriot Act. He said, Joe, I'm introducing the act basically as you wrote it in 1994.
This bill met with overwhelming agreement in Congress.
He had laid the groundwork for a sweeping surveillance law that allowed the federal government to carry out criminal prosecutions based on secret evidence and to detain even U.S. citizens indefinitely without due process.
This new law that I signed today will allow surveillance of all communications used by terrorists, including emails, the internet, and cell phones.
We'd have a special bill passed through here, Mr. President, to allow enough money to let the FBI agents buy weapons as powerful as the drug cartels had. They're getting beat up.
Continuing his decades-long effort to militarize domestic law enforcement in the fight against drugs and terror, Biden had added a provision to the Patriot Act allowing state and local police to obtain federal funding for special equipment to combat terrorism.
There is a strong likelihood that Iraqis would welcome us as liberators.
Biden played a key role in helping the Bush administration build support for other elements of its disastrous post-9/11 agenda, including toppling Saddam Hussein.
There is an emerging pattern that convenience may throw him into the arms of al-Qaeda. So it must be dealt with. He must be dealt with. If you turned on now and the television showed aircraft striking Baghdad, it would not be a preemptive attack. There's nothing preemptive about it. It's an enforcement.
Biden teamed with John McCain to defeat an amendment that would have prevented Bush from going to war unless he got approval from the UN Security Council.
The UN will conclude, if we don't act, America will, so we better. He is still harboring and he is still seeking the accumulation of weapons of mass destruction. That case, I believe, has been made.
Today, Biden has attempted to recast his vote to authorize military force in Iraq, claiming that he trusted President Bush to use that power only to pressure Saddam into allowing weapons inspections.
The rationale was that's the way to not go to war, because I didn't believe he had those nuclear weapons. I didn't believe he had those weapons of mass destruction.
Former Bush and Obama administration Defense Secretary Robert Gates wrote in 2014 that Biden, quote, has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades.
I do not believe this is a rush to war. I believe it's a march to peace and security. I've learned one thing since I've decided to run for president, and I assume one thing. Everything about me is going to come out in the public record. And I've done some dumb things, and I'll do dumb things again.
Joe Biden is again opportunistically changing his political approach in response to a high-profile threat, and is preparing to remake himself as an economic populist who will bring transformative change through federal legislation.
This is when leaders have to lead and governments have to work. This is going to take bold, creative federal action. This will go down as one of the most progressive administrations in American history. The younger generation now tells me how tough things are. Give me a break. No, I have no empathy for us. Give me a break.
Because here's the deal, guys. We decided we were going to change the world, and we did. We did.
In 2020, voters may feel obligated to choose the lesser evil, but they should be under no illusions about what a Biden presidency would mean.
Trump keeps saying that he's a wartime president. We'll start to act like one.
An avatar of the political establishment for over 4 decades, Biden has repeatedly taken advantage of critical moments in history to help lead us to disastrous foreign wars, police militarization, warrantless surveillance, border walls, and mass incarceration.
Use your full authority. This is a war. Act like a commander-in-chief. Use it all.